Welcome back to Librarian Oasis. I'm Joshua,
And I'm Eleanor.
and we're both back with another deep dive.
Yeah, this time we read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
I got to say, this one really gets you thinking about thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
If you want to follow along or dive deeper later, grab a copy.
Definitely.
But for now, just get ready for a deep dive into all the fascinating ways.
The quirky ways.
Yeah, the quirky ways our minds work.
I mean, Kahneman's insights into human cognition have shaped how we understand, not only decision-making, but also biases and even happiness.
It's true, this book really has it all. And it all starts with his early research with Amos Tversky.
Oh, yeah.
Where they really dove deep into how people make judgments when things are uncertain.
Yeah. Their collaboration was truly groundbreaking.
It was.
What I think is so fascinating is that they discovered that even trained researchers fall prey to biases. Yeah, they draw conclusions from too little evidence. They even ran this experiment where they gave their fellow researchers these realistic research scenarios that involve statistics and stuff, and so many of them drew strong conclusions from weak data.
So even experts are prone to these mental shortcuts.
Oh, yeah.
You'd think they, of all people, would know better.
For sure.
This reminds me of the common misconception that emotions are the main driver of irrational behavior.
Yeah, well, Kahneman and Tversky really debunked that.
They did.
They showed that even without strong emotions involved, our minds just naturally make systematic errors. It's not about being overwhelmed by feelings. It's about how our cognitive machinery is designed.
Yeah, it's like our brains are wired for efficiency.
Totally.
Not always accuracy. And their work on these mental shortcuts, or what they called heuristics, has been incredibly influential.
Oh, for sure.
Across so many fields.
A key example is the availability bias.
Which is where we judge the likelihood of something based on how easily examples come to mind.
Oh, okay.
So think about shark attacks.
Okay.
They get a lot of media attention.
They do.
So they feel more common and dangerous.
Right.
Even though they're statistically quite rare.
Statistically, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much our perception of the world can be skewed by what we see and hear.
Totally.
And that kind of brings us to one of the central concepts in the book.
Yes.
The two systems of thinking.
Yes.
System 1 and System 2.
Exactly. Yep. System 1 is our fast, automatic, intuitive system.
Okay.
It's what helps us navigate everyday situations without overthinking.
Without having to think too hard.
Exactly. And then System 2 is slower.
Okay.
More deliberate.
All right.
And requires effortful thinking.
So when I'm driving to work, that's System 1. But if I'm trying to solve a complex math problem, that's System 2 kicking in.
You got it. And sometimes
these two systems clash.
Well, yeah.
And a perfect illustration of that is the Stroop test. Have you ever heard of that?
I have.
You have to name the color of a word that spells a different color.
Yes.
The word red is printed in blue ink.
Yeah.
And you have to say blue.
Yeah.
It's harder than you think.
It is.
Because System 1 wants to blurt out the word, not the color.
Yes, it's so frustrating.
It is.
It makes you realize how strong that automatic response can be. And speaking of effort, Kahneman talks about using pupil dilation to measure mental strain.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is.
Pupil dilation isn't just about light.
Right.
It reflects mental effort.
Interesting.
It's like an electricity meter for our brains.
I like that.
I know studies show that our pupils widen the harder our brains are working. When we're solving complex problems.
That's a very visual way to show how much energy our brains are using.
Yeah.
But we only have so much energy, right? Which is why multitasking complex tasks can be so challenging.
Exactly. System 2 has limited capacity.
Okay.
Strolling and thinking, no problem.
Yeah.
Try mentally multiplying while speed walking.
Yeah.
You'll hit that capacity wall pretty fast.
That's a good reminder that our brains have limits.
They do.
Speaking of limits, Kahneman also explores this concept of cognitive ease. And it's not always a good thing.
Not always.
So cognitive ease is that feeling of fluency and familiarity.
Right.
When something is easy to process.
Yeah, and surprisingly, this can make us like or trust something more, even if there's no logical reason to. So the mere exposure effect, where simply being repeatedly exposed to something makes us like it more. He even mentions a study where chicks preferred tones they were exposed to in the egg.
And that feeling of ease can create this illusion of familiarity where things feel more true simply because they're easier to process.
Right.
Think about slogans or rhymes.
Yes.
They just feel right, even if the content is dubious.
Exactly.
So if I see an ad with a catchy jingle, I might be more likely to buy the product.
You might.
Even if it's not the best option.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
It is kind of scary.
It shows how System 1 can operate under the radar,
right,
influencing our judgments without System 2 even noticing.
And this leads nicely into the concept of priming.
Yes.
Where exposure to certain words or concepts can subconsciously influence our thoughts and actions. Priming always blows my mind.
It's wild.
Like that Florida effect experiment where people walk slower.
Oh, yeah.
After being exposed to words related to old age. It's like magic.
It's remarkable how these subtle manipulations can impact our choices. And poor System 2 can often not believe it's happening.
But speaking of how our minds work,
yeah,
let's move on to causal thinking.
Okay.
Our brains love to find explanations.
They do.
Even if they're not really there.
They love to connect the dots.
It's like our minds are constantly trying to connect the dots and create a story.
Yeah, and that can lead us to jump to conclusions.
Exactly.
System 1 is a master storyteller.
It is.
Remember the Moses illusion when asked, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark?
Right.
Most people don't even notice the error.
Yeah.
We just crave coherence.
We do.
So we accept these seemingly plausible details, even if they're wrong.
It's a good reminder to be careful about those aha moments. Sometimes our brains trick us into thinking we found a connection when there isn't one.
Yeah.
And that tendency to jump to conclusions kind of ties in nicely with the next topic.
Okay.
The law of small numbers.
Right.
And our struggles with statistical thinking.
Yeah, we tend to overestimate the significance of small samples.
Okay.
It's called the law of small numbers.
All right.
And it can lead us to see patterns where there are none.
Like that example of cancer clusters in rural counties.
Oh, yeah.
People assume it's due to lifestyle or environment. But it was actually just because those counties have smaller populations.
Right.
Making random clusters more likely.
Yeah, we often crave those clear-cut causal explanations, even when the reality is more nuanced and statistical.
So we need to be careful about drawing sweeping conclusions from limited data.
Yeah.
It's like that old saying, don't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
Or in this case, don't judge a study by its sample size.
Exactly.
But speaking of biases, let's talk about anchoring and availability.
Okay. Anchoring is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's where exposure to a random number can influence our estimates. You remember that experiment where people spun a wheel of fortune and then estimated the percentage of African nations in the UN?
Right.
The wheel's number, even though it was totally irrelevant, swayed their guesses.
It's amazing how easily our minds can be influenced by seemingly meaningless information.
I know, it's wild.
And then there's the availability bias, which we touched on earlier. It explains how media coverage can shape our fears.
For sure.
Making some threats feel much more imminent than they actually are.
Right.
Like we're more scared of sharks than falling airplane parts.
Exactly.
Even though the latter is statistically more dangerous.
It is.
So we need to be aware of these biases and not let our gut reactions completely dictate our decisions.
Right.
Now let's move on to representativeness, a bias that often leads us to neglect crucial base rate information. Remember the Tom W. and Linda problems?
Oh, yes. Those were classics.
Yeah.
Tom W. was described as shy and organized.
Right.
And people assumed he studied computer science.
Yeah.
Even though humanities was statistically more likely.
Yeah, they were swayed by how well he fit the computer science stereotype.
Exactly.
And then there's Linda.
Yeah.
She was described as outspoken and concerned with social justice. People thought feminist bank teller was more likely than just bank teller, even though logically a subset can't be more probable than the larger set.
It just makes sense.
It's a great example of how powerful our intuition can be, even when it leads us to make illogical judgments.
Totally.
It's like our brains prefer a good story to cold, hard statistics.
Exactly. And speaking of stories, let's delve into regression to the mean.
Okay.
A statistical phenomenon that often challenges our understanding of cause and effect.
This is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Regression to the mean basically states that extreme outcomes tend to be followed by more average ones.
Right. We often attribute outcomes to skill or effort.
Right.
But chance plays a bigger role than we think.
Okay.
Like praising someone for an exceptional performance only to see them decline next time.
Right.
It might seem like the praise made them complacent,
Yeah.
but statistically they were likely just regressing to their average.
It's a humbling reminder that luck plays a larger role in our lives than we often acknowledge.
For sure.
But our minds don't like to admit that, do they?
Not really, and that brings us to the narrative fallacy.
Okay.
Where our minds create these coherent stories about the past,
Okay.
leading to an illusion of understanding.
We love a good story, and our brains are great at crafting them,
They are.
even if it means filling in the gaps with assumptions
Yeah.
and oversimplification.
Like the success of Google.
Right.
We attribute it to the founder's brilliance, but countless other companies with similar ideas failed.
Right.
It's easy to look back and create this compelling narrative,
Yeah.
but impossible to know all the factors that could have led to a different outcome.
So we should be wary of those neat and tidy explanations of success or failure. The reality is often much messier and more complex.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick break to process all this amazing information.
Welcome back to Librarian Oasis for our deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the fascinating question of whether expert intuition can outperform simple algorithms.
This is a debate that's been going on for ages.
Yeah.
Can those with years of experience and a gut feeling really beat a set of rules based on data?
It depends.
Okay.
In some domains, like chess or firefighting, intuition honed by experience can be incredibly valuable.
Okay.
But in less predictable areas like the stock market,
Right.
simple algorithms often win.
So like those financial advisors who claim to be able to predict the stock market.
Exactly. They might sound convincing.
Yeah.
But in those less predictable domains, consistent success is often more about luck than skill.
It's a good reminder to be skeptical of claims of expertise, especially when it comes to predicting the future.
Yeah.
And that brings us to something I've always struggled with, the sunk cost fallacy.
Ah, yes, the sunk cost fallacy, that trap of sticking with a losing course of action simply because we've already invested so much.
Like pouring more money into a failing business.
Right.
Or staying in a relationship that's clearly over.
It's tough.
I know I've been there.
But rationally, past investments shouldn't dictate our current decisions.
Right.
We need to focus on future costs and benefits, not what we've already lost.
Yeah. It's about knowing when to cut your losses and move on. Even though it can be emotionally difficult.
It can be.
But speaking of emotions, Kahneman talks about regret.
Oh, yeah.
And how it influences our decisions.
Regret is a powerful motivator.
It is.
We often overestimate the likelihood of experiencing it,
Right.
which leads us to avoid actions that might lead to negative outcomes,
Okay.
even if those outcomes are unlikely.
Like that example of someone who avoids picking up hitchhikers because of a past experience where they were robbed.
Exactly.
That's understandable.
It is.
But statistically, it's an irrational fear.
It is. We need to be mindful of our emotional responses
Yeah.
and consider the probabilities, not just our gut reactions.
Right now, shifting gears slightly, let's talk about how mental frames can influence our choices.
Okay.
Frames like those picture frames.
Not quite those kinds of frames.
Okay.
Mental frames are the lenses through which we view a situation.
Okay.
They can really shape our perceptions. Think about someone who loses a $10 bill
Okay.
versus someone who loses a ticket worth $10.
Okay.
The loss is the same,
Right.
but people react more strongly to losing the ticket.
Because it feels like a more concrete loss.
Exactly. It's all about how we frame the situation in our minds.
Interesting.
And this ties in nicely with the concept of choice architecture,
Okay.
which explores how the way choices are presented can influence our decisions.
Choice architecture. That sounds intriguing.
It is. It's about designing environments that make it easier for people to make choices
Okay.
that are in their best interests.
Okay.
Think about default options.
Okay.
Automatically enrolling people in a retirement savings plan,
Okay.
unless they opt out, can drastically increase participation rates.
It's like giving people a little nudge in the right direction, but still giving them the freedom to choose.
Right.
That's pretty clever. But let's get back to one of the most impactful ideas in the book.
Okay.
The distinction between our experiencing self and our remembering self.
This distinction really challenges our assumptions about happiness.
Okay.
We often think it's about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain,
Right.
but it's more nuanced than that.
Right. It's not just about the moment-to-moment experiences, but also how we remember and evaluate those experiences later on.
Remember that colonoscopy example?
Oh, yeah.
People rated a longer procedure with a less painful ending as less unpleasant.
Right.
Even though it involved more total pain, their memory was shaped by the peak end rule,
Okay.
not the total amount of pain.
It's like those stories about childbirth. It might be excruciating in the moment,
Right.
but the memory becomes something beautiful and meaningful.
It's a powerful reminder that creating a positive narrative of our lives is important,
Yeah.
even if it includes some inevitable challenges and setbacks.
We've been unpacking so many fascinating ideas
Yeah.
about how our minds work, from those pesky biases to the power of stories.
I'm excited to explore how Kahneman's insights can help us understand ourselves and the world around us even better.
Absolutely. One thing that really stood out to me was his discussion of happiness and well-being.
Oh, yeah.
He challenges that traditional view that it's all about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain.
He introduces the focusing illusion, where we overestimate the importance of certain factors in our happiness
Okay.
while neglecting other more crucial ones.
Right.
Remember that classic example of people assuming those living in sunny California are happier?
Oh, right. But studies show climate has a much smaller impact on happiness than we think.
Way smaller.
It's like when we focus on one thing, it takes up way too much space in our mind.
Exactly. We do this with income and material possessions, too.
Yeah.
We think a bigger paycheck or a fancier house will make us significantly happier, but the research suggests otherwise.
So if material wealth and external circumstances aren't the keys to happiness, then what is? Is there a secret formula?
Kahneman suggests that finding activities we find engaging and meaningful plays a crucial role.
Okay.
It's about spending time with loved ones, pursuing our passions, and contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Right.
Those things tend to have a much bigger impact.
It's about creating a life that feels fulfilling, not just chasing fleeting pleasures.
Exactly.
It's like choosing a book that's thought-provoking and enriching, rather than just a quick beach read.
What a great analogy. And speaking of books, as we wrap up our deep dive into Thinking Fast and Slow,
Yes.
let's revisit some of the key takeaways. You'll find this book really is a gift that keeps on giving.
I completely agree. One big takeaway for me is that we're all susceptible to those cognitive biases, no matter how rational we think we are.
Those mental shortcuts are sneaky.
They are.
They can lead to errors in our judgments and decisions.
Right.
But by being aware of them, we can at least try to lessen their influence.
Right.
It's like knowing the tricks a magician uses. It doesn't ruin the show.
Right.
It just lets you appreciate the skill even more.
That's a great way to put it. And another important reminder is that our emotions play a much bigger role in decision-making than we often realize.
Absolutely. We're not purely rational beings.
We're not.
We're driven by feelings, intuitions, and sometimes, as Kahneman shows us, those irrational impulses.
So being aware of those emotions, and maybe even questioning them a bit, can help us make more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Don't just go with your gut all the time, right?
Exactly. And remember Kahneman's point about how sometimes we need a little nudge in the right direction,
Right.
especially for complex choices.
It's that balance between individual freedom and recognizing that we don't always make the best decisions on our own.
Right.
Sometimes we need a little help.
Absolutely. And finally, let's not forget the nuanced view of happiness that Kahneman presents.
Yeah.
It's not just about fleeting pleasures, but also about how we shape the narrative of our lives.
It's about creating a story that feels meaningful and fulfilling, even with its inevitable ups and downs.
Exactly.
It's about savoring those special moments and learning from the challenges.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we highly recommend picking up a copy of Thinking Fast and Slow
Yes.
and diving into Kahneman's brilliant work yourself.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Thinking Fast and Slow here at Librarian Oasis.
It's a book that truly has something for everyone.
It does, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those pages turning.